Welcome, everybody. Thank you for showing up today. I'm Joe Appa. Hope you're having a nice summer. We have a special webinar for you today. We wanted to talk about mergers and acquisitions in the nonprofit world, which has been a pretty hot topic around these days in our nonprofit market here in the DC area. So I thought we would do a webinar on that, and I brought a couple of great experts I think you're really going to get a lot out of today. Glenn Ogilvie and Connie, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a minute. I'm Joe Appa. I'm a senior partner at the Baldwin Group. I work in the nonprofit vertical. I've worked for about 30 years in the industry, working with nonprofits. I've served on several boards and worked with many nonprofits over many different subjects, mostly in the financial services arena. But for now, I'm going to throw it over to Connie, and she could tell you a little bit about herself.
Sure. I'm Connie Phelps with Berenzweig Leonard. I head up the corporate and M&A practice at the firm. Berenzweig Leonard is a business-focused law firm here in Tysons. And before I go into a little bit more detail about my practice, I just wanted to give a big thanks to Todd Castleberry, who is our producer today. Todd is the president of BLC Digital Strategies in Tysons. And as a law firm, we are so fortunate to have a podcast studio inside of the firm, and Todd is our fabulous executive producer and magician. So he will, regardless of our mistakes, Todd will make us look better at least better than I am. So
and
thanks to
I
Todd.
can use all the help I can get. So
Same here. Go Todd.
Yes. Okay, and Glenn?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Glenn Ogilvie, and I'm CEO at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. Delighted to be here. You may already know that the center has supported nonprofits since 1979 across a multitude of capacity building and support areas. And it's quite fitting that we're talking mergers and acquisitions because it has come up a few times during my tenure.
Great, great. Well, I know that we want to get started on that, and there's a lot to talk about today. We're going to unpack quite a bit, so I thought I'd just throw the first question out to Glenn. And Glenn, why don't you tell us a little bit about the state of the market right now?
Sure, Joe. Thank you for that. And Connie, it's great to be here with you, and I'm excited to kind of unpack with your experience what's happening in the merger and acquisition space. So, the nonprofit sector has always been strong, very resilient. We have experienced quite a bit of crisis management required episodes, the Great Recession being one, the recent COVID-19 outbreak being another. And now the sector is challenged with limited resources. We did have a good webinar on executive orders and the impact that those are having on organizations' funding. Those funding pauses and freezes and losing revenue altogether. We've seen individuals lose their employment. Those individuals were individual donors for many of our organizations, so there's a great challenge in revenue. And I would say 25 to 30% in some cases of revenues have been lost by our organizations. And as a result, they've had to pivot and make some adjustments. So we are seeing changes in staffing, changes in space, liquidating of assets to really try to find ways to do more with even less resources. So the sector, while strong physically and emotionally, very challenged financially. So we're having to go through a new realm of strategies and innovation to figure things out for community, which is most important to all of us.
Of course, yes, and I've seen that myself with lots of cuts and people changing the way they do business the way it used to be, especially with a lot of the landscape changing almost daily. It's settled down a little bit over the past 6 months or so, but at the beginning of the new administration, there was a lot of changes happening, and most people weren't sure what was going to happen and what it was going to look like. So I thought I'd bring it to Connie. Connie, what is your opinion on that? And I know you've been involved in a lot of mergers and acquisitions over several years, and I'd like to hear what you think about this.
Sure. And as you both indicated, it is a challenging time, not just for nonprofits, frankly. There are challenges in the for-profit space as well. I'm thinking of our wonderful government contractor friends. Berenzweig Leonard does a lot of work with government contractors, and we support them through a myriad of their needs, from employment to litigation if that arises. And my space is corporate and mergers and acquisitions, and we do IP as well. But as you noted, Glenn, in this particular moment in time, just as nonprofits are feeling the pains of reduced funding opportunities, so too in the GovCon space. So we have to get creative and look for opportunities for our clients to, in some cases, join forces, whether that be through a merger, acquisition, or even a less formal arrangement, maybe a strategic alliance. Maybe they can do some joint ventures together. There are a number of ways to try to manage the process and manage the times that we're in to kind of successfully weather this storm so that you can come out the other side healthier and maybe a little bit wiser with a few battle scars along the way. My background in M&A is both in the for-profit and nonprofit space. They are in some ways very similar in terms of the steps that you go through in the M&A process, and there are of course some differences. You know, primarily being in for-profit, you are looking to shareholder value. You know, a key term in a for-profit deal is the price, the purchase price. You know, we don't have that in the nonprofit space. We're much more mission focused, and we want to make sure that the nonprofits align in their missions, in their cultures, and a whole number of factors that I think we'll get into a little bit later in our discussion.
Great. Let me ask you this: when you're talking about factors when you're merging, what should a nonprofit be looking for if they're looking to potentially merge with another nonprofit?
Yes. So I think it's very important that the nonprofits look for a good fit. They need a good partner, and it can be a nonprofit that's in the same space that provides similar services. So I like to think of it as the nonprofits choose to combine instead of compete for those reduced resources, you know, the reduced funding opportunities that you mentioned, Glenn, maybe even combining office space, sharing services, back office space. So there are opportunities in that area. And in addition, you could look at a nonprofit that might have similar services, but that more complementary. So an example that I'm thinking of is in the healthcare space. There's a nonprofit which offered more health and physical health services, but didn't provide mental health services. So that was a gap in their offerings to their constituents. So they sought out another nonprofit that was focused on mental health services. Now, those were in slightly different times. There weren't really financial concerns for those two nonprofits, but it's an example where you can look for opportunities to complement each other. And and Glenn, I'm going to steal your line from our prior discussion, 1 + 1 = 3.
Oh, I love it.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
That plays back in my mind endlessly.
Yes, I thought it was so great, and I'm going to use that over and over.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I'm so glad, Connie, that you have you brought up culture, which is so important, the ways in which organizations come together, and finance being a key factor. We have seen, and Joe, you talked a lot about organizations coming together in other ways. What we've seen from our experience is a few steps and levels prior to even looking at merger as an opportunity. And kind of you mentioned sharing an employee, having a shared back office. We've seen organizations co-locate together to reduce the burden of rent in some cases. We've seen some organizations have strategic alliances to expand their geography because they may be located in this region and something slightly outside, maybe as far as Baltimore, creates an opportunity for two organizations to expand. So I think there's any multitude of reasons why it can bring benefit to either expand mission, grow the size of the organizations or the organization's impact, but also in a time like this to reduce costs.
For sure. Yes, I think those are all excellent points. And as you say, these can be stepping stones to a merger, to an eventual transaction. But it's I like to analogize it to dating.
That's right.
You know, you're kind of checking each other out, testing the waters a bit, and seeing if your cultures align, seeing if your missions align, which is critical to any successful merger. So I think it gives you the opportunity to work together with a partner organization and build trust over time and collaborate, see how you work together. And then it may make sense at some point down the road for the two nonprofits to merge.
It's really good.
Yeah, I agree with the both of you. I think that culture is probably the biggest factor when you're considering an alignment together. But I know in the real world, there's also many other factors that need to be considered as well, such as what would leadership look like, getting stakeholders to buy in on the merger. So wanted to hear from each of you a little bit about what you think would be those other factors and how you could kind of work with them. So Glenn, I know that you've been involved in some mergers and acquisitions, so I'll start with you first.
No, I appreciate that. So we have explored on our own merger unsuccessfully, and we made 2 attempts. The process that we used was to build the new organization together over a period of time, engaging our board members, engaging some of our stakeholders, and then to decide whether or not this new organization is the new entity and dissolve the 2 existing entities. And Connie, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that piece or that particular process. But where we made an error was to not talk about human resources and governance until the 14th month. Yeah. And I think had we talked about that earlier, we would have had more traction. But we did see that there were differences in the business modeling and the revenue generation capability, so those were other reasons why it didn't work. And then in the second iteration, we talked about HR and governance earlier on, but it was still too late.
That's an excellent point, and you're not alone, Glenn.
Right.
That's a difficult conversation to have, but as you know, necessary, and the earlier the better. That is a key factor in merging, and in merging successfully, is to identify what your leadership is going to look like post-merger. And are you going to maintain, you can't have 2 CEOs necessarily. I mean, I have seen it done, not successfully, but
right.
Typically you've got to address that head on, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You also need to address the board. Yep. What is your board going to look like? Are you simply taking Board A and Board B, combining them, and suddenly having a much larger board that may be a little unwieldy? There are other options for that. One compromise that I've seen work to some success is to allow both boards, all constituent members of the boards, to be on the resulting board, but over time, as there's attrition, you don't fill those vacant seats. So over a period of time, your board size is reduced and becomes a little bit more manageable. It's a compromise as opposed to, you may need to face the decision head on and figure out, all right, in a post-merger world, what is our board going to look like? Who is buying in to the merger, and who is going to help us kind of go to the next level? In terms of the CEO, also, I think a difficult conversation, because you have 2 CEOs and you really only need one. And you can certainly offer hopefully a generous severance package to the CEO who is not going to continue. Another option, though, may be to have a transition period to allow for both nonprofits to learn how to work together and benefit from the leadership from both CEOs. And over time, the departing CEO then kind of steps back over a transition, maybe 12 to 18 months before ultimately leaving the nonprofit. Another option might be to create a new role for the second CEO. And that might be a senior vice president role or something similar. Maybe there's a special project that needs a certain type of leadership that CEO may have the skills for. So there are other options to complete severance, but it is something that needs to be addressed early. You want to have those discussions not only with the CEOs, but also, of course, with the boards, because they are part of the leadership team and important players in the whole process.
Have you found that generally when you've done these M&As that there's been more one bigger firm and a smaller firm, and usually the bigger firm ends up taking the leadership positions, or has it been the other way around where they're both trying to share and figure out who's going to do what?
Yeah, I think my personal experience is with the former. It is typically a more dominant organization is taking the lead on the resulting entity, and it may be through a classic merger where one nonprofit merges into the other and then dissolves, or it could be more of an acquisition where the larger organization acquires the assets of the smaller organization and then dissolves the smaller organization subsequently.
Got you.
But yes, in terms of leadership, I think in that situation where you have a more, I'm saying a more dominant, it typically ties to financial strength as well. That organization does tend to take the lead in terms of leadership, CEO, and even board positions in some cases.
I see. And how about getting stakeholder buy-in early? Have you seen that happen? And Glenn, this is also good for
Sure.
you because you were
Absolutely.
actually involved in that. But I would like to hear from Connie first and then Glenn about stakeholder buy-in.
Absolutely. You have a lot of stakeholders, especially in the nonprofit space. It's not, in the for-profit world, you have to ultimately keep your shareholders happy, and your board of directors, your CEO, your management team. But in a nonprofit, it's a much wider lens, and you certainly have your board, your CEO, but your major donors are key. You don't want there to be surprises for your major donors. So communicate, communicate, communicate. Do it early and often, and make sure everyone is on board. Answer those difficult questions early in the process, because they will come up, and it's better to address them early and figure out a resolution to them. And I know,
Gotcha.
Glenn, I think you had some experience that you can share.
Yeah, I like that a lot with checking in with stakeholders to include donors. As a nonprofit organization, you're really tied to the revenue to allow you to operate program. And in some cases, a large part of that revenue is coming to you from private and family foundations and individual donors. Most often, those donors are donating to both organizations, right? Because they have similar mission. It's something that they're passionate about or a focus area for the foundation. We did have conversation, and we've helped some of our member organizations to do this as well, with philanthropy to understand what their intentions would be with a combined entity. Would you give the combined entity more than you gave the two separate entities combined? Would you give less, and what would that look like? And more often than not, the answer was less to the combined entity. So that went into the not a good idea bucket through discussions and through exploration. So I love what you said about talking to individual donors, because they make up a good share of the revenues, and you don't want to catch them by surprise. And you also want to make sure that culturally they are also confident and engaged in what the new culture will be. So very important part of the process. It takes long, it's slow. You start with good intentions to do a full-on feasibility study and evaluation. You don't start knowing that it's going to happen, and you want to manage expectations as well, because that too can challenge your donors on the back end if it doesn't work out.
Absolutely, and I think as you raise a very important point, Glenn, that if the result is 1 + 1 = less than 2,
That's
or
right.
maybe even less than 1 post-merger, that certainly doesn't make sense for either organization. So those conversations with donors are absolutely critical to have up front. The major donors, right? And you know who they are. You know who
Yep.
the key ones are. And frankly, they may even have other ideas. They may see other opportunities for the nonprofit. It might be that your first kind of candidate as a merger candidate might not be the one that they would prefer to donate to, or
Yeah.
to increase the donations for, but there might be another candidate out there, and they can help in that search for you.
Yeah, and I think there's also challenges within the leadership for the successful CEO, if we call it that. We often say that people give to people, and they give to people they can trust and that they've come to know. So if the successful CEO is not revered, not someone who has the history of leadership and moving the organization forward, someone who would need to be take some warming up to get to know. That also could challenge the balance sheet right up front.
Gotcha.
That's a great point.
Yes. And we are taking questions, by the way. I think we already have a couple on the board. So as we're talking here, we're going to kind of incorporate your questions into the webinar too. So feel free, if you have questions, we have the experts here at the table. This would be the time to ask those questions. You don't have to pay for it. It's all here, and
Right.
we're taking care of that for you. So, yeah. One of the questions that we did get in your experience, what are some of the most common pitfalls for the organization seeking to do or implement an M&A type transaction?
It's a great
Connie?
question.
Yeah, I think, and Glenn actually raised some from his personal experience that I think are very good lessons learned, and that is not facing the difficult decisions early. I think we'll walk through a little bit later what the mechanics are, some of the steps that you go through in a merger process. One of them is kind of hammering out the terms. What is this organization going to look like following the merger? What we talked about board, we talked about CEO. Will we have the same mission? Will our mission expand? Are there any kind of pitfalls that we need to be looking for? Does one organization have challenges in a certain area? You want to bring those to light pretty early in the process so that you can discuss and collaborate and work through resolutions. You don't want there to be surprises late in the process. You want all of those to be addressed early on. And I think you're operating in good faith. You're both trying to reach yes, but only yes if it makes sense for both nonprofits.
Yeah, and I would add to that, making certain that everyone is engaged right up front, looking at the financial aspects of it all, which is another pitfall that we've seen time and time again, and ensuring that the organizational structure, the new structure, is clear amongst the employee base. Because merging two organizations and a bunch of employees then being lost isn't also the outcome that we're looking for. We're really trying to bring the culture together. Oftentimes, and we saw this and we see it time and time again through explorations, you see potential backslide in productivity in year one. And that's the revenue, that's the people, that's understanding the new structure. The more you can do up front to help prevent or allay some of that, the better.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I know that, and I think one of the other things that organizations don't always do is they fail sometimes to actually identify where the pitfalls are where their exposures are. One organization's exposure may be our funding source is only coming from a community services board or some type of federal funding or even local funding. If that goes away, the nonprofit goes away. Those kinds of exposures are there, but you may want to merge with another nonprofit where some of their funding isn't all coming from federal government or local government. So those have to be identified and make sure that they're being covered as well too.
You actually raised a really good point and make me think about something that we're doing now, which is scenario planning relative to losing revenue and resources. And we also think about this relative to strategic planning. Think about mergers that just closed right before the pandemic. You just merged both organizations. You thought you had it all under control, and here goes a completely different environment. But planning for every scenario that could possibly occur, you think about this federal funding. What if it goes away? What do the two organizations then do in that regard? But the more we can do up front and the better and more comprehensive we can be, the better.
Yeah, I know sitting on several boards, that was one of the things I always pushed was disaster planning is what we called it, but sounds more ominous than it is, but you always feel better at night knowing that if something occurs, you know what's going to happen.
That's right.
You know what to do next.
Or
That's right.
stress test.
Oh, I like
right?
that.
Yeah,
Like
that's much better.
Jamie Dimon, he's famous for, I don't remember the number, just hundreds of stress
Stress
tests.
tests, wow.
Obviously, large bank, we're thankful for that.
Right.
It drives the world economy. But yeah, I think we could all benefit from a little more stress tests of our organizations after some of the challenges we've been through.
Absolutely.
So if, Connie, I know that you were involved in some of these things. What does it look like behind the scenes? Give us a little bit peek behind the curtain about how they determine what the leadership's going to look like and things like that? Is it as simple as they flip a coin and the winner is the new CEO, or is there a lot of back and forth? Are you bringing the parties to the table as a mediator and trying to work this out? How does that typically happen?
Yep. This is a long, thoughtful process. You don't wake up one day on a Monday and decide you're going to merge with another organization, and it happens that Friday. You are talking with that other leadership team for, it can be months and months. You're getting to know each other. This is going back to that dating analogy. You're deciding if it makes sense. Understanding generally the financials. In these initial discussions, you're cautious about how much information you share. They tend to be discussions at a fairly high level, but as you proceed through the process, I would say when you are getting more serious about sharing information, then you bring the lawyers in, and we have both parties sign a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, and that gives you some comfort that you can share a little more confidential or sensitive information with the other side, knowing that it's subject to these confidentiality requirements. So that allows you to further get to know each other. You're still not making the tough decisions on leadership yet, because you haven't decided if you're going to move forward. And I'm getting a little bit into the mechanics, so I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but it's a step-by-step process. And as you get closer and closer to saying, yes, we want to merge, that's when you need to start those conversations. You've been talking to each other, you kind of get a sense of your strengths and weaknesses and where it might make sense for the leadership to combine. Maybe you decide that one of the CEOs is a fabulous fundraiser, and that CEO should be focused slowly on fundraising. Let the other CEO be more in charge of operations and branding and some of the other big challenges that are out there. You can divvy up responsibilities that way is another opportunity. But as you move through the process, as you get a little closer and closer to saying yes, then you have to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and figure out what are the terms and what is the merged entity going to look like. And that's where, again, we can help facilitate those conversations. A lot of them are taking place between the CEOs. When they bring their boards in, some boards choose to have a merger committee or a team of individuals that's devoted to the merger process. It takes time and resources to walk through that merger process. So you want to be sure that you're serious about it, because it is going to cost money to the nonprofit, both, again, in terms of expenses, legal expenses, financial expenses when you're bringing your CPA in. It's also a lot of time. And that is opportunity cost, right? Because you're not able to devote your time to doing other things. So you have to think through those steps along the way.
Got you. And Glenn, I know that you actually rolled your sleeves up and actually attempted this. So do you have any insight that you'd like to share with us on that?
I do, and Connie, I love the way you laid that out perfectly. I love the merger committee, a group of people representative from each of the boards going through the back and behind the scenes detail, the NDAs, all of it sounds familiar, and understanding what we are attempting and where there may be roadblocks and where there would be even further incentive. So I would say that through our process, we did have a committee, 3 members from each of the boards. One was our current board chair at the time, nonprofit attorney Jim Goldberg. He's the gentleman who had the iconic 1 + 1 must equal 3 statement. Amazing guy. But what we really focused on is, as charitable entities and organizations, is this the right thing for the community? Is it good for mission? Is it going to expand our ability to generate revenue, expand our reach, which ultimately means we would serve more nonprofit organizations and helping them to build their capacity? It takes a lot of time, and you're right, because now this merger committee, which are volunteers from each of the boards. Board members are volunteers. They're spending time beyond that of traditional board meetings, really investing in research and learning and understanding for what could happen here. As you go through the process and you bring in insights and opinions from other people, you're really organizing to make some decisions. And at every board meeting, we're reporting back to the full board on how things are going. You know, some would say time flies, but in other cases, it can feel like it's moving really slow. We did this for over a period of 14 months before getting to sort of a decision space. But several factors pushed us to hit the pause button. The recession started, and things were ramping up, the Great Recession. Our mission needed us to support them. So all of that time, Connie, that you mentioned that we would be spending on this other thing, we quickly realized we really need to focus on our existing business. Very well organized, greatly informed process led by some consultants. Both CEOs were able to be participants, so we would not have to then be facilitators. And we knew about culture. The CEOs, we trusted each other. We had collaborated previously. We dated, if you would, for quite some time. So a really good, well-organized process that got us to understand what was best in our organization's interest. And I'll end with that. I mean, the nonprofit sector is very much, we call it the people business. And with people, you have personalities and opinions. And people always want to know, am I going to be okay? So when you talk about the successful CEO and the severance, those are things that you should also lead with. So folks are comfortable in engaging and being connected in a way that is authentic and real.
I see. That's a great answer. So now that we've done that, let's say that the boards have agreed, everyone's agreed. I brought the peanut butter, you brought the jelly. We've just made a perfect
Connie
sandwich.
has the bread.
Connie's the bread. Yeah. We've just made the perfect sandwich. How does it work now? How do you get the culture to start to combine? Like, is it something that just occurs naturally and you're waiting for it to happen, or is it something you kind of push along? And I'll start with you, Connie, first from the legal perspective. What did it look like when you got these two companies to combine? Did you step out, or were you still involved in trying to get things to continue?
Great question. And I think the combination of the culture, first of all, you're making sure the cultures are aligned because you are learning about each other throughout this process. And I think that builds a lot of trust certainly among the members of the merger committee. They are sharing information with the board. You are percolating this information out to the organizations so that you're not expecting to flip a switch and suddenly, presto, everyone is one magic happy family. You are taking a long time. And Glenn, 14 months seems like a long time, but it can take that long, especially depending upon the economic environment. But you have spent that time and built those relationships so that you are aligning the cultures. You're learning how each other works. If you are combining offices even, this may sound trivial, but it gets down to workplace culture as well. How do you manage your office? How do you manage your meetings? What are your office hours? Do you have a dress code? Is there remote? These are the types of things that factor into the culture, and it can make people happy or not happy. So you're thinking about those things along the way so that there hopefully aren't many surprises after you've completed the deal. But it's a lot of people and being sensitive to people's needs and addressing them early, thinking about them early so that you're prepared.
Connie, you made me think about so many things. Which payroll company do we use? How often do we have board meetings? And where are those meetings held? There's so much that can go into it process-wise to kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty. But so I've seen some, and I've witnessed some successful mergers, so maybe I'll speak from that vantage point for where things go once you arrive. Working through the process of who will stay on with the new entity and who will not is a major undertaking because it's not just the CEOs, but it's the sometimes hundreds of other employees where there is in some cases duplication. But managing those new position descriptions, the new workload in detail, recognizing when you can have one FTE responsible for a particular area or when you may need more, doing searches for new people if you need to grow and expand even further than that too can be a challenge. So, It's definitely not, and I appreciate you saying it's not like you start on Monday and Friday, presto, it's all working well. It takes some time, and then I think regular check-ins to evaluate how things are going, and pivoting and making adjustments for things that might not be going as well as we thought is also an important thing to think about going into it.
Definitely.
I see, and I think that to add to that as well, too, that it's just going to take a lot of time, like you said. I think you both alluded to that. Well, I actually said it directly, and it's really about getting things working together, and then once you get them working, you kind of make the adjustments along the way. So I feel like that's how it's going to probably be best served for the employees and their culture, is just make it happen and see what it looks like and make the adjustments where necessary.
Yeah, I think we can't go without mentioning the potential surprises after the merger has completed. It's the legal matter or the unexpected expenses that we kind of missed when we went through the process. Those two are things that I think pop up needing to be resolved. You can do a lot of due diligence on the front end, but in some cases, some things find the way to slip through the cracks or to stand in the gap. So I can't say enough how important it is to do all of that due diligence up front and to understand what you're getting into before getting into it.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Glenn. I was thinking the same thing. We had kind of started talking about the process for merging, getting the NDA in place. And when you reach a point that you're getting closer to a merger, you put down at least the initial terms of the merger in a non-binding memorandum of understanding. I'm sure you've seen a few of those. And the key there is it's non-binding. You're not obligated to move forward. If you decide to back out, you can do so without penalty. But then the next critical phase of a merger is diligence. I can't emphasize enough that this is where you've got to spend a lot of time, and the lawyers do a lot of the work, but you also have the executive team involved as well, helping to gather the materials that are relevant to the diligence process. And these are things like your financials, obviously, are key. Your financials, your tax returns, your governance documents. So if your nonprofit has bylaws, all of your board actions, you want to look at the contracts, see if there are any consents required in order to do the merger. Those can, when they pop up late in the process, it can delay the merger, and this happens both in for-profit and nonprofit mergers. You need to look at your employees, as Glenn pointed out. Who's staying? Hopefully, you have room for everybody. You may not. You have to make some tough decisions there. You need to understand what the benefits are, what you're obligated to pay, where you might be able to take advantage of the combined company and choose one benefits package over another. You need to think about your payroll systems, HR, all of the back office systems that hopefully you can have some efficiencies there once you've merged. But you're looking at all of those systems, all of those documents, that information during the diligence process. And it's not like a one-step process. You don't provide the information, let the lawyers review it, and you're done. It's very iterative. So there will be, you might provide information, then there are follow-up questions, and you provide additional information, and there are follow-ups from that. So that process can take a while, but it's well worth the time to try to avoid those surprises on the back end.
That's where legal counsel, professional help comes in to kind of guide you to what you should be looking for, looking at, or grabbing, what documents should be being pulled right now. I know
Absolutely.
all of us nonprofits have had documents that are put in a drawer with, you have to dust it off every once in a while to look at it or even remember where they are, but they're there. And that's where you get the list from your legal counsel saying, grab these documents here, we need them.
And it's a long list.
Right.
But we're there to help you. We're there every step of the way.
Yeah. Well, I know we've been talking a lot about M&A and mergers, the actual merger and acquisition. Wonder if I'm a nonprofit that's not quite ready to do M&A, but we're interested in it, but we're not ready to quite get there yet. Are there alternatives out there that are to the M&A that we can do that maybe we could try first, kind of, as they say, dip your toe in the pool before you dive in? What do you think?
Absolutely. There are any number of opportunities for two organizations to work together. You might do it through a strategic alliance. You might actually set up a joint venture. I think what I see more commonly is you have some specific task or specific project in mind where the two organizations can work together. So I'm thinking of, for example, joint fundraising. You might combine efforts there, and you want to document that so that you understand what your roles and responsibilities are, what the expectations are. Similarly, you might do joint programming. And again, you typically want to document those things so that it can be a somewhat informal arrangement, but having it on paper, I think, lets everybody know this is what our expectations are. These are your responsibilities. These are mine. These are shared responsibilities, and it kind of lays it all out on the table. And then it may eventually lead to a merger. If things go well, you may do a few of these over time, and you decide, you know what, we work really well together, and I think we can work together on a long-term basis. I think we can do more than date, and that's where a merger might be in the offing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's so many things, as we mentioned, and I think the best time for organizations to come together and test whether or not they mix and mesh well is when there's no money involved. So a collaboration on a programmatic initiative, it could be a 5K run event or some other health benefit thing where the two are working together. You get a chance to see how one organization works and how the people connect and the leadership connects as well. We've also seen organizations share employees. We've had shared CFOs. One CFO hired half of the funding provided by one entity and half by the other. He or she is the CFO for both. The fundraising is great because you do have funders who will not fund anything new unless it's collaborative and innovative. So now the two organizations, 1+1, are able to get access to these resources that neither one could get on their own to begin with. The good news there is, well, I call it good news, the check can only be written to one entity. So there has to be an MOU in place and some collaboration. So now you get a chance to share where resources are involved and on as you get down the line. And then you can think about moving in together, shared space, and ultimately, further down the line, maybe even a full-on merger.
Yeah, and shared services, I think that is also a really good opportunity to reduce costs.
That's right.
Right. If maybe you're sharing personnel, like in your example, you might share some back office services. You might share office space, right? There are ways to address the financial challenges that folks are in today, that we all are in today,
Sure.
And do it in a way that actually might lead to something even more fruitful down the road.
I think that joint programming is also a good way to go, where I might not be big enough as a nonprofit to take on a particular contract or a particular service, but if I bring somebody in to work with me on it, that would give us enough resources to go ahead and tackle that together, and then
Absolutely.
we both benefit. Have you had that experience at all, Glenn?
Yes. So shared programming has really been helpful to kind of get into new spaces and geography where you didn't operate previously. One organization may have the relationship or influence with local policymakers to get clearance to be in certain spaces, and the other not, but the two together can now serve that larger community. That's happened as well. And I think when we see that we can be successful and we have these small wins and they get to be larger wins, and we know that we are enjoying each other and we're very similar, or we can come up with some shared core values, it leads to even bigger things in the future. One of the things that's really hard to access for organizations in this region is national funding. Funding from a national entity. Oftentimes this region gets looked over when those larger national funders are providing grant funds, and some of our federal agencies as well. So two organizations together, or three, make it much more appealing because now the outcomes in your proposal are very large and very exciting to that funder.
I see. And I know, Connie, you mentioned some, combining back office staffing. is that difficult thing to do, or is it one of those things? I know there's probably some legal contracts involved in doing something like that, but how are the mechanics as far as who actually owns the employees? I know you combine them, but are they under one tax ID number? Are they under a different tax ID number? Do you start a third tax ID number and put them in there? How would that work?
All of the above.
Okay.
No, more typically, you see the employees belonging, being employed by one organization. So they might be W-2 employees, or they could be independent contractors, but they're typically receiving their payment, and if they're employees, receiving benefits from one organization, and then are effectively being contracted out. So there's contracted out to the other organization. So the agreement is really between the two organizations, but the personnel themselves might be devoted to the other organization that isn't their primary employer. But there are all sorts of arrangements that we can do, because at the end of the day, it's a creature of contract. So we can work with the two organizations and figure out what makes the most sense for them and their staff, again, whether it's employees or independent contractors, and then we work with them to draft the contracts to make their aspirations actually real.
And what about as far as, okay, we've worked together, we've gotten some wins under our belt, as Glenn said, we form an alliance as opposed to just merging the companies together. How does that work? What is your opinion on that?
Well, it can be very successful. And again, it depends on what your objectives are. If you have specific services, maybe they're new services that each nonprofit is interested in branching out into, that might be an opportunity to work together, to collaborate, where not one organization isn't taking on all the risk by themselves, but instead they're spreading that risk across one or maybe even two or three organizations. So that's an opportunity. We talked a little bit about joint programming, joint fundraising. These are very natural opportunities for organizations to work together to spread those costs and share in the opportunities, share in the upside.
I see. Okay. That makes sense too. I mean, that way we're all gaining some of the reward, but we're offloading some of the risk as well too. So I think it benefits everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, Glenn, now on your side, I know that yours wasn't particularly successful, but you've been involved with some successful mergers kind of from the outside as kind of an advisor to those.
Yep.
What would you say was, without naming names, what would be successful? Like when you saw it, did you know right away it was going to be successful? Or did you think, well, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but we can get them there?
Yeah, so we always approach it, planning for the worst, but hoping for the best, anticipating bumps in the road, and really trying to smooth things out before those come up. So thinking about the questions that may arise, thinking about what could be non-starters and starting with those. Oftentimes if two organizations are coming together and one is not doing as well financially, which I think happens, that's one thing. And to talk about the strategy to come out of that, or what the merger will do to resolve that, is a good place to begin. But then you have organizations who may have had legal challenges in the past. Some may have been public legal challenges, which can challenge the reputational asset. Talking about that right up front versus whispering around the table is also important. And then that's one of those bumps in the road. So when the two organizations come together, it's not just the finances, the human resources, the governance, but it's also the reputation. And some of their history of success or lack thereof. So you've got to figure out how you communicate this publicly. And I will also say the NDA is great, because we often think about, we think about in headlines, what would the headline be if this were to get out? And we try to have communication strategies to make sure that it's a good one. But thinking about what that external communication strategy is going to look like, about the exploration, but also about the merger, if it is and when it is complete, and how you will ensure that the general public receives it as prudent, equitable, and that everyone is feeling well and well taken care of through the process.
Yeah, and I have two comments there about the messaging, because I think that is that can be as important as anything else. In terms of the messaging, when you actually have a deal that comes to fruition, even if behind the scenes, what really happened is let's say a stronger or more dominant organization acquired the smaller or maybe financially struggling organization. When you're messaging to the public, to your donors, to your stakeholders, you might characterize it as a merger.
Sure.
And that, I think, is a more graceful way of presenting the transaction to the public, and it allows both sides to kind of have their shoulders back, heads up high, and know that we are moving forward together through strength. And as opposed to sometimes you hear acquisition and it's one organization gobbling up another, and we like to message more as a merger, especially I think in the nonprofit world. And then one other point, this is kind of a technical point, but on the NDAs, you had mentioned, Glenn, about being concerned about the fact that negotiations are taking place, becoming public. And one thing that I have seen, and I certainly offer up to clients, is you can include in the NDA that the fact that there are negotiations going on is part of the NDA. So both sides are precluded from sharing that information. You're not guaranteed that it won't leak out somehow, right? Because there are a lot of hands working together, gathering information, et cetera. But it at least puts the parties on notice that for now, at least, for purposes of this NDA phase of the process, we want to keep the negotiation process itself confidential until we decide whether we're going to move forward into the MOU process and then ultimately into the actual transaction documents and closing the merger.
Yeah, and I think there are personal assets as well. Sometimes the founder, the organization is young enough that the founder is at the table as the merger discussion. And if the organization is merging into another, they'd like the name to live somewhere. And we've seen where the name of that organization that merged into a new one is the name of a program or a segment of the new organization. Really, really tasteful and much appreciated. And it also gives the individuals who were served by that organization a place of belonging. They know they're coming to a new place, but that culture of what they grew within is still there. We didn't talk about one of the nuances, which is the branding, because sometimes when there's
Glenn,
a new entity.
we are on the same wavelength. I was just going to talk about
the
branding.
logo. Are you all the way there?
Yes, for sure.
The colors.
What is on your website? Exactly. Yes.
It can get so nuanced. What a new logo, what the new name is going to be. Those are the things that you think are easy, but they take quite a bit.
For sure.
Especially when one of the founders of the nonprofit's still involved, right? They don't want to see their project just kind of go away, dissolve, right? So there's a little bit of ego you have to deal with as well there too. So
it needs a prominent place on the website.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That usually solves the problem.
Yeah, that helps.
Well, I know we're wrapping up here. We're coming up to the end of our hour already, and we still had plenty to talk about, but it was great to talk to the two of you. Any closing remarks that you'd like to say or anything like that? I know that we went over a lot today. I think what I got out of it personally was that if you're looking at something like this, enter it cautiously, I would think. Kind of dip your toe in the water a little bit if you're not exactly sure about this. And then if you are deciding, well, maybe we should talk a little bit more seriously about this and peel this onion down a little bit more, maybe bring in outside help. And that's kind of what I got out of this. So I'll start with you, Glenn. What are you thinking? What are your closing remarks?
I think I want to say out loud that merger is good. It's a good thing for us to think about, although we talked about all of the technical aspects of it. And if we are public charities and if we are here for the mission, we should be willing to do whatever is in the best interest of the mission and not ourselves generally. It is innovation for organizations to work together, collaborate, raise funds together, and to merge. And if you can position it to be something that is bigger for community, better for community, it's definitely something that should be explored. And I'll hang on to your final point of just a moment ago, Joe, bringing in outside help. is so important, to do it right, to maintain the integrity of both organizations, and to know that what you're doing is not just one person's opinion or another person's great idea, but literally within best practices and all of the legal aspects as well. So merger is a good thing, is where I'll leave that.
I love that message. Merger is a good thing, and I would add, we are here to help.
That's right.
We are here to help make it successful. And I would add, I think those were excellent comments by both of you. I think I would add that don't wait. Don't wait until perhaps the organization is having some financial difficulties and is in a position where they need to be acquired. But let's think a little strategically, look down the road. You don't have to commit to something today, but I would say look for opportunities, and it might be an organization that you think, you know, I want to get to know what that organization does and how they're successful. Work together. See if your cultures align. See if there might be opportunities to do some joint programming, to maybe do some joint fundraising. And along the way, what started out as a particular opportunity in one area may ultimately lead to a merger down the road. So while it is it's an involved process, we're here to help to make it, I can't say painless, but I think or fun necessarily, but it will be a great learning opportunity, and I think it can lead to really positive outcomes for both of the organizations involved. Right. So start early and keep your eyes open, and opportunities come sometimes from unexpected places.
Isn't that the truth?
Very wise words. Thank you for that. I appreciate both of you today coming in and speaking with me. I think we're going to hold more of these. We're going to look for another topic that we see in the community that if people are asking a lot of questions about, we'll certainly get another webinar out there. So I enjoyed our time together with the two of you today, and thank you so much. And we'll be seeing the audience soon. Thank you again.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.